Welcome to the Sharp Way Show. Yes, it is Larry Sharp here, a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. So happy that you are here with me this evening. And yes, I have a very, I think, special show tonight. I know you think every show's special because they all are, but this one has a little special. I'm just making stuff up now, but it's all true. You got to believe me, it's all true. I want to talk about what I think I've been talking about in the past and now coming back, a renaissance, I would say, in the idea of motherhood and homeschooling. And I know some of you who are watching like, Larry, where you been? But some of you are like, Larry, what are you talking about? Well, I want to bring somebody on who will maybe give us some enlightenment, maybe in this regard, or at least a new idea or way of thinking about this issue. It is author and activist Rachel Wilson. How are you?
I'm great, Larry. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. And if you want to see what Rachel's doing, you can check her link tree out link that's in the description, or just follow her on Twitter because the link tree is there. And Twitter, it's Rach for Patriarchy. And if you're listening to this, Rach is RACH, the number 4, and patriarchy, because she's for the patriarchy. So there we go. We've just answered our question. Life is good. Look, the things we're talking about, Rachel, though, are motherhood and homeschooling.
Yes.
And I think the quote that you said that moved me on a personal note was they did that so many people, or maybe even our society, has seen or is seeing motherhood as something you do at nights and weekends. And the reason why that hit me is because that's how I was raised, right? My mother saw me nights and weekends. My mother worked the entire time that I knew her, until she retired, like in her 60s, right? And then I was already in my 30s, so I was in my 40s, maybe, I don't remember. But anyway, but I never knew her as a kid not working. And I feel like that part hit me. However, I think that a lot of people changed their mind after the COVID lockdowns.
Yes, I think so too. I agree with you. Really what happened with the lockdowns is it was the culmination of about a century and a half of planning and propaganda and institutional training all kind of come to a head. It's kind of like a long-term plan that all came to a head at once. And the people who were in charge of things, right, they just kind of went for it. They went kind of full authoritarian and did these lockdowns and
They did
this very draconian stuff that a lot of us really never thought was possible in America. We didn't think we would see it here. And it opened a lot of people's eyes to a whole lot of things, not the least of which is that women had to stay home now, right? At least for a while. For a few months, a lot of working moms ended up at home. They ended up having to do like distance learning with their kids online. They had to navigate life at home all day long with the whole family in the house. And we've had multiple generations now of every day when the family wakes up, dad goes off to his building, mom goes off to her building, the kids go off to their school buildings. We spend the whole day separated and compartmentalized, and then we come together at the very end of the day.
Yep.
A lot of nights kids have sports or gymnastics or extracurriculars. You've got all these things going on. So maybe you see your family for an hour or two a lot of nights. Yes. And then maybe a little bit on the weekends, but weekends are busy with all the other things you need to get to, right? So it stopped everyone in their tracks and everybody had to completely readjust. And
hold on, I want to touch this for a second.
Yeah.
What I think made this even more special, right? We've had downturns before. Mm-hmm. But usually the downturns affected the men more than the women, right? Yeah. That was the norm, right? 2008, 2009 hit men far more than women. I mean, women got hit too, but men got smashed, right? Yeah. 2001, 2002, men got smashed more than women.
Right.
This time was different. Yeah. Women took the brunt of this. Women got hammered worse than men in this one. And that's the first time, at least in my lifetime, that I can say women got hammered far more than men this time. And I think it's to your point, because still in America today, and I think throughout the world, but surely in America, women still do the lion's share of child rearing, right? They still do the biggest chunk of it. And when they shut everything down and the moms couldn't go back to work, and the kids come back to school, and then when the moms could go to work, but the kids couldn't go to school, that was everything. I'm sorry. I just wanted to kind of.
No, you're completely right about that. Yeah, because the careers women generally occupy, which a very funny thing I like to cite often is a statistic where if you look at the top 20 careers women occupied in 1920 versus 2020, they are almost identical.
Wow.
Which is shocking. A whole century of women's liberation and feminism, and the top jobs occupied by women are still administrative work, childcare, early childhood education, cook, waitress, bookkeeper, retail, office management, clerical, administrative work, that sort of thing. All of those things can be done remotely, right? Whereas men tend to work in like engineering, infrastructure, things that you can't always do at home on a computer, things you may have to be out in the real world doing with your hands, stuff like that. So you're right. It did affect moms a lot more. And there's a piece that I wrote for Gab, which I discussed on Tucker Carlson, where I cite the fact that a lot of the women who stayed home during lockdowns ended up not going back. The largest demographic of people who did not return were mothers of small kids, right? And I think this is because like I'm 42, right? And I was raised in the 80s and 90s with lots of go girl stuff, lots of She-Ra, Madonna, and Oprah, and like strong women. And it was just like a foregone conclusion, a general assumption that I would go to college and have a career. And then, you know, after I had done all that, maybe I could think about having a family. It's how things have been done.
Let me touch this again. I'm sorry. I mean, but you're hitting so much good stuff. You're hitting so much good stuff. I want to go to the second piece. Most people don't know this, but in America, we've had a baby boom. But we've had a baby boom on a very specific segment. Older women who are part of the professional management class.
Yeah.
Not women who are in the pink collar jobs, right? Not women who are nurses, women who are out there doing those jobs, not teachers, but women who are part of the professional managerial class who can do their job mostly from home. It's weird. I say this all the time. When you give women more choices and options in their professional world, they tend to have children.
Yes.
Most women, not all, but most women do want to have children. Most do. It's just a fact. So if you give them more choices, they tend to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, when their mindset was, no, I can't have kids. I have to go to the building. So how can I have a kid when I got to be in the building?
Right.
Now all of a sudden they're like, well, come to the building once a week or once every couple of weeks or not at all. Mm-hmm. Women said, oh, well, then let me have a baby.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm accenting what you're saying, that not only did that happen and women decided to stay home, but also they decided to have babies.
Yeah, it was like suddenly there was a little bit of wiggle room and maybe some permission and maybe like a silver lining in this horrible lockdown scenario, which was so incredibly bad for so many people, that at least maybe now this is a possibility. Maybe I can be a mom too. Maybe I can have a more family-oriented life instead of basing everything around a job or a career first, and then whatever else I can fit in around that on the nights and weekends, right? So it just it kind of took us all back to a time before this was the norm and gave us a little glimpse of what life is like when it's more home and family oriented rather than career oriented. And turns out a lot of women like that.
Yes.
You know, they like that.
But
so
the downside, I think, is it scared a lot of men.
Yeah.
Right? You see a downfall in men since 2008. It's obvious. I mean, it's happening for years. But to the 2008 crash, I mean, men are getting their ass kicked in everything you could look at, right? And the lockdowns didn't help us either. So now you found a lot of men who said, I'm not going to work either. But they're not staying home to watch kids.
Right.
They're staying home to watch the internet.
Exactly.
Right? They're not staying home to watch kids. They're not like, oh, good, now I can stay home and have babies. They're not doing that. They're staying home. So
yeah, they're just kind of checking out. They're just kind of checking out of city.
Yes. So while there was a silver lining for some women, there was also a horrible dark cloud for some men too. The lockdowns, I think, did both.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
So,
and what happened with school, I mean, even when the schools started back up, it was pure chaos, and there were mask mandates, and there were vaccine mandates, and there were social distancing, and a lot of kids that maybe already had learning problems and stuff were really, really struggling. And there were just so many things going on that a lot of parents just said, this is insane. Like, I don't even know, one kid gets sick, they might shut the school back down for 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
So it was unreliable, it was chaotic. And I think a lot of women thought, well, why can't I've been doing this at home online or with the kids for a couple of months. Why don't we just keep doing that? I mean, we can do it on our own time, on our own schedule, and make it work for us how we want to. And I think a lot of people had a light bulb go off that, wow, education is different than school, right?
Right.
School isn't necessarily education. And maybe we could talk just a little bit about the origins of the public school system in America, if you want to, for a minute, to kind of
Let me give you my quick story.
Sure.
I always supported homeschoolers. I always did. When I ran for governor in 2018, I actually had a plan that would give a rebate to people who, who were homeschooling so they could homeschool their kids. In 2022, I did even more, but I always was supporting homeschoolers. But I got to tell you, I never thought I'd be one, right? I live in Queens, New York. I thought, I got good schools where I live. I'll be fine. Who cares? But exactly to your point, when I saw what was happening with my school, the lockdowns, they treated my daughter worse. I'm not joking, worse than a prisoner. And I live close. I live in Queens. I live close to Rikers Island, which is the most violent jail in the United States. I live close to that jail. So I know people who work in that jail. My father used to be, back in the day, he was actually a corrections officer in that jail. And they were treating my daughter like prisoners. And I said, I'm done. And we did exactly what you said. We brought my daughter home and we homeschooled her. So, but what people then started telling me, and I'm going to go right into what you're talking about.
Sure.
Is I heard, Larry, you found out what the schools have become. And I said, what's that? The schools have become indoctrination centers. Now they're indoctrination centers, right? But according to your book, and by the way, if you want to pick up a book, you can. You can head over to her Twitter account. Her link tree is there. Click that. It shows you exactly where to buy the book. You can buy it on Amazon if you want to. I got the Kindle because that's who I am now, but you can get whatever you want, hard copy, Kindle, whatever you want. I got the Kindle. Get whatever you want. You can. But you talk in your book, and you said more in interviews that this is not a new thing about indoctrination. Walk me down that road.
No, it's not. So the origin of public education in America, Horace Mann and Elizabeth Palmer Peabody were probably the two people that were the most responsible. Horace Mann, he started the first Department of Education in Massachusetts in the mid-1800s. And he got his conceptions of what public schooling should be from the Prussian system. Now, this was coming out of the Napoleonic era after this, when the Prussian idea of schooling was, we need to make good militaries, we need to make good industrial workers, we need people who are subordinate and follow authority and listen to orders, and we need uniformity, right? And Horace Mann,
gotta make sure those guys and gals get into uniform and stop Napoleon from coming across the border next time.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
That was kind of the concept, right? And Horace Mann loved this for kind of a different reason, because he was an ultra progressive for his time, a very progressive, like authoritarian kind of person for his time. And he thought, he and Elizabeth Palmer Peabody had this idea that if we could have a uniform system of public education where we unlearned all of the stuff kids are learning at home, whatever religious and moral and philosophical ideas are learned at home, and we teach them the same uniform system that we would like them to know, that we'll get a society of good, obedient citizens. We can probably eliminate things like war. We could have world peace because everyone will think the same. Everyone will be the same.
So hold on. So the intent wasn't evil. The outcome clearly was evil, but the intent was not evil. You're saying the intent was actually a good intent.
Yes. I mean, this is a common thing that happens where people will have a good intent. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, isn't it?
Correct.
So they had a good intent, but of course, like people like you and I hear that and we automatically think, wait, you want total uniformity of thought and opinion and belief? That's a terrible idea. But they thought this would help. They were kind of part of this transcendentalist intellectual club that saw humanity as going to this like transhuman Now, this is 150 years ago. You hear a lot about transhumanism right now, but 150 years ago, this was already kind of a predecessor to the New Age, where they thought we could bring about world peace, total equality, justice, social justice, and things. If we get everybody thinking exactly the same, we eliminate all of the alternative opinions, ideas, philosophies, and belief systems, and we make everybody good, obedient citizens who see, and Horace Mann said, children do not belong to their family, they belong to the state. The state, he said the state is the father of children. Well, so this is the worldview of the people who created compulsory public education. Now, at the time, this is another big misconception. People think that prior to public education, all Americans were like these totally uneducated goobers who couldn't read.
Oh, no. Look, I'll be very clear. Many people don't know this. America has always been, relative to other countries, a super literate society.
Yes.
Relative to the countries, super literate.
Yes. In the mid 1800s, I think Boston had like an 85% literacy rate, one of the highest in the world. And this was prior to public education. Public 100%. Schooling is actually the new experimental thing, right? All of human history, we had schools, we had schools outside of homes, but the majority of people learned at home, and maybe some of them went to specialized schools or private schools or religious schools, things like that. But we never had a compulsory public education system that was paid for by taxes, right? Until the last 120-ish years or so. So this is the experiment, and it's always been about indoctrination. That is not new. It's just that prior generations didn't know that because, well, they were indoctrinated. They were very heavily propagandized, especially, I think the peak, it's really bad now, but the peak was really like the baby boomer generation. And I like to show my kids in our homeschool when we're doing history and stuff like 20th century history, I like to show them the videos that baby boomer kids were forced to watch in school of like, you know, the Russians are going to nuke us. So if you hear the air raid siren, you got to get under the desk. You have to hide from the nuclear annihilation, which was silly and probably caused lots of cognitive dissonance and kind of terrorized people. But it really was like a major era of propaganda where you didn't have internet yet. So you didn't have alternative media. You just had like Walter Cronkite and whatever.
No, I agree. Look, I'm an old Gen Xer. Right. So I got the end of that, if that makes any sense. Right. I got the end of that. As a teenager is when like cable came out and we got like CNN, which at that point was alternative to, now it's totally establishment. But at that time, it was alternative to the ABCs. Right. Yes. MTV was radical at the time. Right. It wasn't what it is now. But I mean, for a kid growing up in the 70s and the 80s, I did begin to see that, but I still had people who had done that. And my mom was a boomer. So, but I want to go to a point you brought up in the past, which is on the same, you're taking me down a good road. So thank you for taking me down this road. Sure. But you gave the two parts I want to bring up. The first one is the boomer part. And this part is, you've said that boomer women are the most unhappy in America.
Yeah.
And when you said that, I was bothered by it because my mom's a boomer. So I felt it, right? And then I realized you're right. And I was kind of mad because I didn't want you to be right. It's the truth, right? I was like I didn't want to believe you. Like, she's got to be wrong on this, right? But then I was like, no, she's right. And it bothered me because I know you're right. And you were talking about their drug use, prescriptions, mental illness, and you just listed, like, I don't remember it was like 3 or 4 things you listed. I don't remember the stats you listed. Sure. But you listed a bunch of them. And I was like every woman who's older than me, or even my age, fit at least 2 of those categories.
Yeah.
So like everyone that I know, like they're all in that world. And your mindset, if I remember right, I think you were talking about your mother in this interview I saw. You're talking about it happening in your own world. I think your mom is a boomer. Is that true?
Yep.
Yeah, my mom's a boomer also.
I'm a Gen Xer and my mom's a boomer generation too. So yep.
Same me. So you and I are the same in that regard. Yes. I probably got about 10 years on you, but we're in the same generation.
Right.
So yes. But I guess my point is, when I saw that, your point was that one of the reasons why you believed it is because they were indoctrinated. And what I've said before, not related to you, And this is from a woman who, she actually is the silent generation. She was an executive coach in the 80s. And she used to coach women, mostly boomer women. And she told me when I asked her why she picked that. And she said this to me. She said, because women, she didn't say boomers, but she meant boomers, were told a lie. And I said, what do you mean? She said they were told they can have everything.
Yeah.
And they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that like slapped me in the face. And this is probably 20 years ago she told me this. And it slapped me in the face. I was like, what? She said, they can't. She said, here's the reality. Nobody can.
Nobody can.
Men can't either. Nobody can have it all. But these women have been told they can have it all. Mm-hmm. And what she said is, you can have a lot, but you can't. But the thing is, you can't have it at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
So you got to pick what you want, and you got to have it at certain times in your life.
Yes.
But you can't have it all. And she made a living. She was actually on Oprah. I don't want to tell you who she is, but that's the person's friend of mine. She's actually on Oprah. She made a living telling boomer women it's a lie.
Yeah.
And then when you said that, that went right to my head. I went, that's it. Maybe that's why I'm so unhappy. I don't know.
It's really tough because, you know, in my book, I dedicate a lot of time to documenting how the feminist movement was not something, everybody thinks of it as a grassroots movement that women just kind of looked around one day and they went, oh my goodness, we're oppressed. Right. We're oppressed and we've got to do something about this. And we have to fight for our liberty and we have to be, but liberty from what, right? From marriage, from motherhood, from the family, from the home, to do what? Work for corporations, to pay taxes, right? So the people that really pushed this, if you look around the turn of the century when suffrage was a thing, like when women got the vote, there was much higher participation in anti-suffrage groups than in suffrage groups by women. We have some polling from before it was actually put on the ballot that showed that only about 4% of women had any interest whatsoever in voting or participating.
Okay, hold on. I know where you want to go on this. Before you go on this, let me do a little bit of admin if I could for a second. Because I know you're going to walk down a road here. Let me do some admin if I could. Guys, if you like what you're hearing, and she's going to go down a road that is going to make your head explode. So before your head explodes, if you like what you're hearing, do me a favor, click that like button. It does matter. Click the like button now if you haven't, please. It does matter. I have to get past all the algorithms. I get shut down. I get shadow banned. I know Rachel gets shadow banned. So we all get shadow banned. I know she does. So help us out. Click the like button so that we can get past those algorithms. And if you want to support this show and content like this, you can. You can do so by supporting my sponsors, theadvocates.org, the Advocates for Self-Government. If you head over there to advocates.org, take any of their surveys. There's one on gender. If that bothers you, we're talking about gender now. Take one on gender. Take a survey. When you're done taking a survey, share it. Take the world's smallest political quiz and share it. It's anywhere from 2 to 6 minutes. It's free. Doesn't cost you a dime. You share it. They're happy. I'm happy. You support the show. Life is good. So please do that. Support the show. And if you are watching this on Twitter, do me a favor. Retweet this right now. Literally click that retweet button right now so we can get past those algorithms. I appreciate it. And please, as I said 1,000 times, we have somebody here who's given us some time. Support her. Follow her on Twitter at Rach, R-A-C-H, 4, the number 4, patriarchy. Or you can go click her link tree, which is in the description. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go down this road. Are you about to? You're saying, last thing you said was that there were only about 4% of people who were actually for the suffrage movement at the time.
Yes, only 4% of women. And in my book, I include some of the pamphlets and posters made by anti-suffrage groups where they outlined their thinking of why they did not want to have the vote. And wow, they were really ahead of their time and really prescient in what their reasoning was. One was they could foresee that if they had voting rights, they may end up getting conscripted into the military. Oh, and they did not want that. They were, they thought, well, if we start participating in civil service and we're voting on the future of the nation, when men are the ones tasked with defending it, there might come a point where we're expected also to defend it. Are you going to start conscripting us into compulsory? That was one reason they gave. Another reason they gave was they thought it would create divisions in the family and in marriages, because you're going to have men naturally voting for things like lower taxes, more liberty, a stronger military, and then you're going to have women voting for safety and things like that. So they could foresee that this is going to cause some division and a rift in the family, which at that time, there was no question that the family was like the center of society, right? And then they also didn't want to have to do things like participate in jury duty. They thought that politics was kind of dirty, a dirty game, which it kind of is, right? And they said, if we suddenly become like voting citizens, we will no longer enjoy the protection and the provision that we enjoy now, which I think is very interesting, because in the final chapter of my book, I do go over all those stats that you were talking about. I'm a little statistics machine these days. But all the things feminism promised to do for women, it didn't deliver on.
But hold on, let me go back to the first part. I want to go to that one too.
Yeah.
The first part I want to bring up is, isn't it very easy for someone to come back at you and say, Rachel, of course they didn't want it. It's Stockholm syndrome.
Right.
Right? They have been kept under the patriarch's thumb for 80 bazillion years.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they wouldn't want it. It's Stockholm syndrome. Isn't that a natural retort?
Yeah, I do debates on this issue quite often, and that's usually the very first and most obvious thing that people will object is, well, they only thought that because, they didn't know what they were missing, and they, it probably seemed scary to be free from the patriarchy, and of course they didn't want it then, but isn't it just more choice for women? What's wrong with women having more choices? Well, that would be nice if that's what it not really what happened. Women didn't just end up with more choices. It was something that was pushed into a certain direction with a purpose. So if women didn't want this, how did we get feminism, right? If women weren't the ones who, it didn't come from them, where did it come from? Well, the people, I did a bunch of research into the funding of like early suffrage, early feminist movements, all the way up through the 20th century. And it started with kind of the new class of industrial elites, the ultra wealthy families of the Gilded Age.
You're about to talk about literally made me angry.
It made me angry too.
Yes. Yeah. So we're on the same page. So keep going. I'm sorry.
So, the people who thought this was a great idea were, your kind of stereotypical bad guys of this era, right? Like Vanderbilt family, Carnegie's, the Belmont family, who were like bankers for the Rothschild family and things like this. The most super wealthy elites of the time, who were like kings of the new industrial age, had ridiculous amounts of money and political influence in this country. They were the ones who pushed and funded it and basically shoved it through. So we had like these ultra wealthy people who were also kind of involved in a lot of scammery and other things that I go through in the book.
The thing that drives me crazy about this whole story is, right, my image has always been the reverse.
Yeah.
That the robber barons, the powerful people of the late 1800s and early 1900s, all of them, they wanted to keep women in their place, right? Shut up and sit in the back of the home and make the dinner, right? That's my image of them completely. But what you're saying is, and you bring up the data, is the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason, like, you ask yourself, well, why would they care? Why would they care about, women's issues? Well, a couple of reasons. Factories and mechanization were huge at this time. Everything had just become mechanized, and factories were like the main driving force of the economy, and they needed labor badly. And so they wanted women and even children working in these factories, working in assembly lines and things like that. And if you get women into the workforce en masse, you can double your workforce and you can drive wages way down.
Yes, so but you also said something else. You said you also double your tax base once you bring the income tax in. Yes. So the income tax hits 1914, 1913, that area. I forgot which one. Hits then. And then 1920, you got women voting and you got them working. And now you doubled your tax base and you flooded the market with labor. So you've now have cheap labor.
Yes, and I bet a lot of people who watch your show know a bit about how the Federal Reserve was created and the Jekyll
We
Island
do.
Club and how they pushed this stuff through under everyone's nose. Uh, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont was the primary funder of suffrage. She was married to one of the guys who was at the Jekyll Island Club and
Oh,
created the Federal Reserve.
right.
So yes, they had a vested interest in let's tax every single adult in this country, not just the men. We need an income tax and we want everybody paying that income tax. So, and they didn't care if it meant total destruction of the family, because again, great. We get the women out of the home, have them working all day. Then we can send the kids to these compulsory public schools where we indoctrinate them and teach them to be good little servants to the state, good little obedient cogs in the wheel who will work in the factories and do whatever the authority says. That's where the school bell comes from, to teach kids how to respond to bells and things like that. So when they got into the workforce, they were like little Pavlov's dogs who just followed the bells and punched
When
in
the
and punched
bell
out.
hit, you knew you had your break and you go to lunch, the bells were, and in that time of warfare, bells and whistles were used in combat.
Yes. Yep.
So
exactly.
bells and whistles, so you know when to charge and when not to charge and when to attack and when to defend. Yes. Wow. This is horrible.
I know.
This is horrible.
I know. And this is why I felt like I had to write a book, because women just don't know this. We're told this fancy story about how women wanted this and they demanded it and they fought for it. And it's only because the women who came before us fought so hard and were willing to risk so much that we have all this wonderful freedom to go spend our lives in cubicles working for corporations. But that's not the real story. And I at least want people to be able to know the real history so they can make their own choices. The reason we don't know the history is because the Ford Foundation created women's studies programs in the 70s in college, and they literally rewrote the history.
Hold on. I can't go there yet. There's too much.
Okay.
Hold on.
Sure.
I want to go what you just said, which is the idea that, people choice, right? Choice. Mm-hmm. I have never thought it was a bad idea for a woman to stay home with her family and kids. I have thought it was a bad idea if that woman believed that was her only option and that she was forced to do so and that she could only be good if she did that. Right. I think she should choose and say, this is what I feel. This is what is in me. I want to do it. I'm totally fine with that. But I don't feel our society is there. And what I mean by that is, and you brought this up, you have 5 children, correct?
Yes.
And you stay home.
Yes.
And you said when you were staying home, a lot of people around you were like, why aren't you going to work? What's wrong with you?
Yes.
Right? They literally were like almost peer pressure, like, what's wrong? Why are you doing this? And I felt that from my mother, right? My mother felt that she just had to work. She couldn't imagine not working. That was just not in her world. Babysitters was normal, right? That's what you did.
Yeah.
And I feel like if my mom had tried it, she would have gotten the same pushback.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But you got pushback.
Yeah. So when I had my first daughter, I was always like a smart kid who was in advanced programs. And it was like, ever since kindergarten, of course, Rachel's going to go to college. She's going to be a doctor or a biologist or something like this, right? Right. It was just like expected. That was the path I was always on. And I had my first daughter when I was only 20. And it was a bit of a surprise, but I was very happy. And when I had her, it was like, to me, nothing else mattered as much as her and raising her and being her mom. I didn't want to do anything else more than I wanted to do that. And I remember the first day having to take her to daycare and having to go back to work, driving there thinking, wait, I'm going to go bring my daughter, who I've never been separated from for a moment since she was born, to someone else, to another lady. I'm going to drop her off, be gone because there was like a pretty long commute, maybe 9.5 hours of the day. I'll be gone. Yeah. And I'm going to pay almost half what I make at a job I don't care that much about relative to how much I care about my daughter, to this other lady to do the thing I want to be doing. And then I thought, this is a stupid system. Who came up with this? And when I would voice that opinion, when I would say, this seems really inefficient and like it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I don't know why this is the default that everyone does, everybody around me was like, you'll get used to it and the baby will get used to it. And this is just how things are now. And then I got fear mongered with all of the possible things that could go wrong if I didn't have my own career and my own money. So the kind of the way I got into this and debating these issues is because I had to get really good at defending my reasons and defending what I was doing, because I was kind of going against the norm, unfortunately, at that point.
Yes. And that's the part that I think has always bothered me, right? As a libertarian, I think you should be able to do what you feel is right. And I know some women aren't into kids, and that's fine. I'm not forcing you. All good. And some women want to have a lot of kids. All good. But you brought up something else, though. People don't like it that you have 5 kids.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, you have 5 kids. You're mean. You're bad. And I'm like, why do you care? Like, some women are like, I have 1, I'm good. Some are like, I have 10, I'm good.
Right.
Why do you care? Like, have the number of kids that works for you.
Yeah, but we had people like Thomas Malthus is kind of where this stuff started. And then I cite in my book, the 60s, 70s book, The Population Bomb, which scared everybody into thinking there's too many people. We have to stop just breeding all of these mindless breeders who are just breeding. And so and then the feminist movement came along and really, really shamed motherhood and said, what are you going to do? Sit at home and just pop out babies? Anyone can do that.
I remember that. Yes. The baby factory.
Baby factories. Exactly.
I remember that.
And people would refer to me with those really derogatory terms. And I would say, wait a second, you think I'm smart and talented? Yes. That's why you should be working. And I'd say, okay, so you don't want the smart, talented women to be having children and raising them. You only want what? The really low IQ, really sloppy people raising. This doesn't make any sense to me, right? If we care about the future, why wouldn't you want intelligent, capable women being the ones who are interested in motherhood? What's wrong with that? That doesn't make sense. But this is all, people don't question where these ideas come from or where these presuppositions.
Hold on. Let me keep going one more step here. I want to bring up, because you also said something else, which again struck me. As a libertarian, gay rights, big deal for us, right? Big deal for us, right? We're all about letting people be who they want to be, all about letting people come out, be who they want to be, all about that. You said that a part of you felt like you were a gay activist in the 60s because women wanted to come out as, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And you had to kind of, I got you. You can come out with me. Almost like a gay kid. I guess in some parts of America today, that's trouble. But years ago, that was a big issue for gay kids, for gay teens and gay adults. Now, not as big, but I feel like it was funny when you said you had to get people to go, it's okay, you can tell me.
Yeah, that's exactly what has happened. So since the book's been out just over a year, and I've gotten dozens and dozens of emails, DMs, even letters in the mail from women saying, I'm in the middle of dental school, or I'm halfway through med school, or I'm supposed to be a veterinarian, women who are clearly smart because they're on these big career paths. And they'll tell me I just got married and all I want to do is stay home and have kids. And I don't know how to tell my parents. My parents will be mad. Everyone will think I'm crazy. They'll tell me I'm wasting my life. They'll tell me I've wasted my education and I don't know what to do. And they really feel like they can't talk to anyone about this. So they come to me, the random lady on the internet who wrote this crazy book. You know what I mean? Because I'm the only person they can tell. That's how insane the propaganda is, to tell women that they're not successful unless they are strong, independent boss ladies, right? And if you're a stay-at-home mom, well, you failed. You're a loser. You're on the couch in your sweatpants watching TV all day or something. And that, let me tell you, staying home with 5 kids and homeschooling, there is no laying on the couch and watching anything in my sweatpants. That's not happening. I will homeschool in my sweatpants on a rough day, but
Sure.
It's the most responsibility possible to be a mother and homeschool and all of that stuff, to run a home and a family, to be the person who, my husband's the breadwinner and works a lot, and I do everything else. And it's a lot. And he says to people all the time, he's so thankful that he doesn't worry because I'm very competent. He knows I can do it. And he's like, I have to trust her with so much. He's like, this is not an incompetent woman who couldn't do anything, So I just
Right.
really
No, I
want
get it.
I want to dispel that awful stigma that if you choose motherhood as one of your paths in life, that you're a loser or something. But now I'm 42 and my youngest one is 11, so there is a little
Mhm.
bit of time. So I can do things like write a
Sure.
book, you know. So
Absolutely.
there's
So
women
let
have
me grab a
different
couple comments
purposes.
here. Some people are commenting.
Sure.
Karen asked the question, what's the title of the book? Now, before you answer, if you want to, you can go to the description and you can click in the description, the link tree, and it says where to buy the book. But go ahead.
Yeah. So the book is Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. It is on Amazon. If you don't like Amazon for whatever reason and you'd rather DM me and buy a copy from me, you can do that as well. On Twitter, like Larry said, it's Rach for Patriarchy. But yeah, where were we going before that?
Oh, no, I got more. Patty says, yes, Larry, I was looked down on for staying at home and raising my children and laughed at behind my back. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
There we go. So she goes on to say, another guest I totally love. Whichever parent wants to stay home with the children should never be shamed. There we
Yes.
go. I love that. I love that. So you got some fans already. So I guess that's good. So Karen talks about the Fed. Us Larry supporters all hate the Fed. That's true.
I
Yes.
also hate the Fed. Yes.
Yeah.
I can totally get behind you guys on everything about fractional reserve banking and the founding of the Federal Reserve and all of that stuff.
So the Terra Wombat says, feminism. Some women decide what's best for all women.
Yes,
So
exactly.
that's
Exactly.
kinda good.
So in debates, when I'm debating these like really crazy, like hard left feminists who, they do want to dictate to me what I must do and what I can say. And
Yep.
I'm like, wasn't the whole point supposed to be listen to all women? Except for
That's
me,
right.
right? Except for me, though, because you don't like what I'm saying. And I'm not even saying, because, they'll say stuff like, you just want all women back in the kitchen. You just want us all chained to a stove. And it's like, no. And by the way, I do dedicate some time in the book also to dispelling the myth that that's all women did. That's actually
Right.
something that's not really true. If you ask most people, they think all women were slaves prior to 1920. Women in many countries and many times throughout history were able to own property. They were able to own businesses. They were able to inherit things, all kinds of stuff like this. So there's always going to be some women who are not into motherhood and don't want to get married, and that's fine. There's always been those women. There will always be those women, and there's other things for them. Most of us do have a strong maternal instinct and want to do traditionally woman things. And I think it's a horrible idea to shame women out of that because it creates horrible cognitive dissonance. So like it tends to be the most high achieving women who suffer the most, or the like most intelligent and capable, because they feel like no matter what they do, it's never enough. That's another thing that I've always struggled with, was like when I did work, when I was a mom, when I was at work, I felt guilty that I wasn't at home. And when I felt when I was at home, I was guilty that I wasn't doing enough for work.
Right.
And you shouldn't have to try to have your focus everywhere at all time. It will drive you crazy, which is why 25% of women are on some kind of prescription medication for mental illness now.
Is that 25? Is it that high?
25% of all American women are on some kind of prescription for mental illness now.
Well, I now want to go to the next piece, if I could, which is the idea that, look, I love the idea of women being freer. Of course I do. I want women to be as free as they possibly can be. But I feel like the system that we've created, which I know your book goes into people who were starting it, funding of it, people are behind it. And I think that's what ruined this, right? I think we could have gone down this road, excuse me, in a more, I don't know, natural way than being forced through certain people. Because what's happened is it was supposed to make love better. It was supposed to make the family better. It was supposed to do all these things, empower women. But you bring up stats, not just from the boomers, but also from the youth. I think something like 65% of all college debt is now owned by women.
Yes.
Things like that. And what I thought was a good thing in my head, because I do hiring and firing when I'm not doing this, I actually have a day job. So when I'm actually doing stuff, one of the things I do is I'm a business consultant. I've been saying for years, I've been saying this, maybe a decade, maybe more. that so much of the talent now, particularly in cities like New York and others, is female. It just is. You want to get a talented woman, employee, odds are high it's a woman, right? Because they tend to be, they're in the workforce, they want to work, they're educated, they've got experience, they're savvy, they've got the credentials you need. So if you're in a traditional, and again, I do hiring for the professional management class, right? I'm not doing hire. I don't hire and fire for frontline workers. So what I do, women everywhere. And I thought that's an amazing, awesome, great thing. But part of that isn't.
Right.
Because what they had to do to get there,
yes,
maybe not so great.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think you're on the right track with that. And there's a couple factors of how I think we got here. One is we talked about that early funding coming from these like elites who were kind of behind the Federal Reserve and a lot of other kind of authoritarian globalist type of mindsets. But we get to the 1960s and we find that the CIA decides they're going to co-opt feminist movements and push it in the direction that they want. So there were elements within the CIA who recruited Gloria Steinem, for example, and used this to really push things like no-fault divorce, things like, maybe like it's not such a bad, remove all the social stigma around having children out of wedlock, things like that. Single motherhood's a strong, independent, wonderful single mom's always the hero in the action movie now, right? And things like that. And they were pushing other agendas with things like Operation Mockingbird, where they owned large portions of the media and used them as propaganda arms. So
wait a minute, you're saying the U.S. federal government did some shady stuff? That's right. Never happened before. No, I can't believe that.
Yeah, it's
so
almost
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's very similar that you find all the time that the same thing they were doing within like the anti-slavery or the civil rights movements, they would do the same things within the feminist movements. So they would co-opt them, they would corrupt them, and then use the messaging and use counter messaging to do all kinds of crazy social engineering stuff to us. So when we think of feminism as being about choice for women, it was never really about that, because it was always orchestrated by people with agendas who wanted certain things that it had nothing to do with like me or your mom or the average lady out there deciding what to do with her life. And then we get further down the road and we've got, public schools telling women things like, if you don't go to college, you won't be able to support yourself. You're going to end up in an abusive relationship. You need to protect yourself. And this is...
Hold on. I want to touch about that. I like what you're saying, because if you look at other more egalitarian societies, like many Scandinavian countries and such, what you said still applies.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, if you look at many Scandinavian countries where they're far more egalitarian, they have a culture of egalitarianism far more than we've had in America for centuries, since the Vikings. Like they that's kind of who they are. Their women still go into pink collar jobs, and they still stay at home and raise kids. That's what they in their culture and society, there was no stigma of women needing to stay home.
Right.
But they do, because many women want to stay home and they want to be in those jobs. And I think even when you have an egalitarian country like Denmark, Sweden, those types of countries, I think you still find women choose to do the things that women tend to want to do, and the men tend to also. So I think you're right. And what has driven me crazy is it's almost like here in America, we fought what most people actually want. Like the society has made us unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've been subject to nonstop propaganda and marketing. Here's another thing to think about. So women now control about 85% of all consumer spending. Yep. That's a tremendous amount of power and influence. And so all the marketing companies for the last 20, 30, 40 years, since the 70s really, have been researching, female psychology and women's psychology and doing everything to exploit women in this regard, because they know that we control most of the household spending, the healthcare choices, things like that. So literally everything we see when women are scrolling their phone, when they're watching TV, every single thing you're looking at is designed to try to manipulate you into making a financial choice or a buyer's decision or a consuming decision or something like that. So very little of our society around us, the things we think we know, the ideas we take for granted, almost none of it's organic at this point. There was a time where it was, but now it's literally all from you've either got the CIA or the global elite, or you've got marketing companies, international corporations who spend billions of dollars on marketing and how to get you to click on their thing and buy it.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's very little of our lives are organic and just come from us and who we are and what we really want anymore. Almost all of it is like engineering from outside sources.
Okay, let me do a little bit of admin if I could.
Sure.
Again, guys, if you like what you're hearing, then do me a favor, click that like button. It does matter. Please do so. It does matter tremendously. If you're watching on Twitter, please retweet it. I got to get past those algorithms. You know, I got to get around them. So help me out and support the show by going to theadvocates.org. They are my sponsor. I can't do this without them. And what do they want you to do? They want you to go to theadvocates.org. They're a self-governing organization. Take one of their surveys, whichever one you want. There's a bunch of them there. There's some on gender issues. There's some on military spending. The Fed. There's one on the Fed. So go there, take the survey, or just take the world's smallest political quiz. Either one. That's the shortest one. But there's even a human respect test. Take that one if you want to. Take one of them and share your results. That's all they're asking. Get people to talk, get people to come, get people to see and have the conversations on self-governance. It matters to me. It matters to them. It supports the show. And most importantly, it's free. Cost you nothing. It's free. Please do that. And of course, please follow Rachel if you could on Twitter at Rach. That's RACH 4, the number 4, patriarchy. PATRIARCHY. Please do that and help her out. It does matter tremendously. Let me grab a couple of comments if I could. Joel says, one parent at home, one parent earning the household income, living within their means, raising their children is a rarity. It's also the root of a great many social problems we have now. And I bring this up often, Rachel. I'm sure you do too. Our prison system, again, my father was a corrections officer, filled with fatherless men.
Yes.
Filled with fatherless men.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest issue. The most common denominator of someone in our prison system right now, and I'll go to our prison, not even jail, prison system right now is they are a male who did not have a father in their life. Most common denominator.
Yep. Yes. And that is a direct result of these like feminist policies. So if we look now, like this is what I mean when I say feminism told us all these things it was going to do. It was supposed to protect women and children. It was supposed to give us more choices. It was supposed to free us and liberate us. But that's not what we see if we take a look at statistics. So things like domestic violence statistics are very tough because they say that most of it goes unreported. But something that you can pretty reliably look at is child abuse rates. And we can see that since now 40% of all kids grow up in a home without both biological parents. In some segments of the population, it's far higher to even double that much. Like in African-American communities, it's almost double that.
Yes.
Yeah, almost all, like it's just normal for kids to grow up without both of their biological parents in the home now. And we know that this is probably the single greatest risk factor for things like substance abuse, ending up in the criminal justice system or the juvie system. It's puts you at much higher risk for things like childhood mental illness. Childhood mental illness was considered extremely rare prior to 1970. If you go look at the old DSM-5, childhood depression, ADHD, all these kind of things, kids with like eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety is huge among kids right now.
Absolutely.
It used to be super, super rare. It was considered a very rare medical condition, and now it's common. So we can look at those things, and we can also look at the fact that kids who grow up in a home where there's some other adult who is not the biological parent, either mom's boyfriend, dad's girlfriend, mom's girlfriend, dad's boyfriend, whoever it is, any adult that's not the biological parent, the instance of abuse goes up like 20-fold. The instance of violent abuse goes up.
Yep.
The instance of fatal childhood abuse goes
Absolutely.
way up.
Yes.
So, I mean, by taking dads out of the home, by kind of destroying the family, destroying marriage, what we've done is made women and children more vulnerable to the people who are most likely to prey on them. If you're a predator, who do you go
Yep.
for? You go for a single mom with kids
Yes,
who's
you do.
in bad financial straits, or even if
Absolutely.
she has money, just a working mom, right?
Yep.
Who's single. So it really didn't make women safer. It didn't make life safer for kids. There's no system. There's no guarantee.
And the family court system doesn't help at all. The family court system makes it worse.
Terrible. And so
Yes.
and now we end up with things like child protective services and foster
Yep.
care things, which are notoriously corrupt. And
Yep.
those things weren't so ubiquitous before women's liberation. These are all these, it's like a tentacle monster, like we see with all these things,
Yep.
right?
So let me get an important question. Jericho brings up, I'm glad women have these choices. Me too, Jericho, I do. I wonder how it would have happened organically, if not by government and elite manipulation. What if they didn't? And I think that was my example of the Scandinavian countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their culture moved towards that without the force of government or elite manipulation. I wish ours would have. I don't know. Maybe our culture was stopping it. I don't know. But I'm happy women have freedom too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying women shouldn't vote. I hope that was clear. I'm not saying that at all, Jericho. My worry isn't that the outcome was that women have more choices. Right. My concern was it was manipulated, not just by government, but also by a school indoctrination system and by the worst heavy hitters in our society. That ours in America happened the wrong way, if that makes any sense, to the wrong people. That's my view. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk for you, Rachel. Please go ahead.
I agree with you on that. I think that's exactly right. So because there's a reason why women's liberation didn't really become the dominant force until we had the Industrial Revolution. And I think that you're right that there would have been more organic forms of some kind of egalitarian type of thing that would have emerged simply from technology, right? Yep. So let's say there was never any suffrage movement or anything like that, but we still had the technology, and we got to like the 1940s and 50s where people had laundry machines and dishwashers, and a lot of women's labor became more mechanized. You got running water in all the homes. You've got electricity, so women don't have to go to wells and carry water. We don't have to do laundry with a washboard that takes all day long. Food production frees up a ton of time. I think you would have naturally seen something that would have been a more organic form of like women's liberation or egalitarianism that may have come about, but that's not what happened, right? So now I really take issue with the idea that women have more choices now, because as some of your listeners and watchers said, they didn't feel like they had a choice. They felt like, no, you're going down this career path.
Interesting.
You're going down the career path, and we're going to put a ton of pressure if you don't, right? So there's really not.
I'll give you an example. Hold on. I'll give you an example of a nation that it happened late. Some people don't know this. Do you know when women got the right to vote in Switzerland?
I think it was after World War II, wasn't it?
1972.
Yeah. It's pretty late.
Yes. Let me say it again. 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying it's a different way of it happening, right? It happened differently within each culture. Obviously, the Swiss are happy that it happened that way. That's why they did it that way, right? I'm not saying I would have wanted to wait 1972. I'm not saying that. But I'm just giving another example of how that happened. And the opposite basically happened in the Scandinavian countries. They were very egalitarian. 1,000 years ago, they were more egalitarian than most of Western Europe. And Switzerland, 1972.
Yeah.
Ours was 1920. So I think that each culture had to grow as it needed to grow, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's my second book, which I've been working on for a year now. It's going to come out later this year. I think your audience would probably love even more than the first, because I talk about how they did women's lib in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries, and the way it was still pushed by a lot of the same banking elite. So we had people in the banking elite who used like Western liberalism to push it here in the West, and then they used communism to push it in Russia and in the Eastern Bloc. And it's very interesting because they had a figure, her name was Alexandra Kollontai. She was similar to like a Russian Margaret Sanger. And she wrote a ton of like political tracts, books. She gave speeches. She ended up being one of the first like high-ranking government women in the Bolshevik government. And she like came right out and said, we want a communist world, because they were the Communist International. It wasn't just going to stay in Russia, especially in the Bolsheviks. They wanted intentional destruction of marriage and family, because they said that, cross-generational wealth and property rights are a product of men knowing who their children are, right? If none of the men know who their kids are and none of the kids have a dad and there's no marriage, then we can abolish private property. We can get rid of cross-generational wealth, and we can get everyone's allegiance to the state. So same goal, just different.
They're not wrong.
Right? Different methods. So it was the same idea to push, like they pushed a lot of polyamory. They were the first ones to make marriage not through the church anymore, but through the state as a state institution. As you just get a license, and then if it doesn't work out, you just dissolve it easier than any other business, contract you've ever had in your life. So, it was intentionally to destroy liberty.
Let me grab Jericho. She responds. Rachel's actually a very good point about women being confused by their choices. I grew up in a household that was very conservative. My mother stayed home. My father supported that style of family. However, he and my mother both pushed me to go into college. It seemed very hypocritical. I'm very happy with my career, but I have one where I can definitely feel like a good balance. And I'm not gone from my family all the time. Not all women are as blessed as that. Yeah. I agree, Jericho. I'm with you. And I want women to choose, right? And some women decide, you know what? I want to work for a while, and I want to stay home, and I want to have a family.
Yeah.
Right. And some women say, no, I want to have a family early, and then I want to write books when I'm 42. Right. I'm just saying some people decide that. And I think either of those are good decisions. I completely agree. Christine says, if we reform the welfare system, we can strengthen the family. I agree completely. I think we have to work on that too. It's another very important piece. Yes. Dan says, wow, I've always heard the left paint the robber barons as bad. And you're showing me that, yes, they were bad, just not for their reasons.
Yes. Basically, yeah.
Absolutely. But let me walk down, if I could, what I think is the final road.
Sure.
Which is everything you said sounds terrible, but you are still optimistic that there is a renaissance in homeschooling and in motherhood. And here's what I will tell you from my point of view. Then I'd love for you to decide how to put this, put a bow on this. I think you're right. And I think you're right for what I see. I see a massive increase in the acceptance of homeschooling among people in general. Number one, but it's a second part to that. Now, people who are looking to hire, again, I'm into hiring. They're looking for people who are homeschooled now. That was never a thing. And people don't know this, right? I tend to be ahead of the curve when it comes to hiring. Like I told people 10 years ago, a master's degree is going to be a no hire coming up here soon. That college degree is less and less valuable. I've been saying it for 10 years. And now states have said, we don't need a college degree even to become a worker anymore. Like they're getting rid of them. Master's degrees, when I was hiring for tech companies 10, 15 years ago, was literally a no hire. If you had a master's degree, they would tell you no. And so I was like, this is already a problem. Now, people are looking for homeschooled kids. That was never a thing before. That was not a thing. Now it is. Particularly if you are a startup, which I do most of my work in, like that kind of stuff. Tech, finance, kind of startup company. They're actually looking for kids who were homeschooled. Well, now adults, but they were homeschooled as kids. So I think that part's obvious. I think the homeschooling part is getting better. We're not there yet because government is fighting it like there's no tomorrow because that's their money.
Yep.
And they don't like you messing with, they don't care about the kids. They don't like the money. No. But the second about motherhood, I think women are going to have a renaissance. I think you're totally right. And I think of all the horrible things that happened because of the lockdowns, and there were so many horrible things, the one silver lining was mothers saw how important they were in the education of their kids.
Yes.
And mothers saw how important they were in saving their children from the state.
Yes.
And they just didn't get it until this happened.
Yep.
And then they were like, whoa, what if I hadn't seen this? What if I hadn't gotten involved? What if I didn't do this? Oh my God, motherhood matters. What was I thinking?
Yes.
And I think fathers are also going, holy crap, we should have, mothers matter. Like, I think that happened. So I agree with you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to take all the.
No, I love it. That was a great rant. It was perfect. And I agree with every word of it. And yes, it took like this big shock. It took this big like thing that made everybody stop and really actually think about their daily life and what's going on and what's working and what's not. And I mean, schools these days, I mean, you cannot scroll Twitter at any given time without seeing a video of some horrific assault going on in a school, violence in the schools. And when my older ones started out in public school, and then we switched for many reasons. Some of it was the compulsory medical things, the CDC schedule that they want you to stick to that I questioned. And I said, well, what about this one? I don't think this one applies. You know, there was just a lot of things where I was like, this doesn't really make sense. And you're not even allowed to question. I got a nasty phone call from a county lawyer saying, you will not question this. I will sue you. And you don't want that. You can't. He literally said, you can't fight me. I've got the entire county and a team of lawyers. And I was like, oh, I'm being threatened now. That's nice. So do I want my children in the care of people who are threatening me like this? No.
Nope.
And there were issues where there was violent stuff happening to one of my daughters who it was no fault of her own whatsoever. And I was literally told, we can't do anything. It's a liability issue. We can't really step in. We can't really we just have to kick both kids out of school, even though she didn't do anything. Right. So it's like a prison system now in so many ways. And all the indoctrination and all the crazy things that they're trying to teach is really bad too. But I mean, just physical safety is a primary concern now when you're sending your kids to public school. And I also was told, when I didn't want to comply with certain CDC schedules, that when my child is in public school, they are considered property of the state.
Correct. Yes.
And I was like, well, that's that then, you know.
Correct.
That's it for me forevermore. And I was very lucky that my husband is very supportive of all this too and totally agreed with me. But tomorrow on my YouTube channel, for anybody who's watching this that's curious, we're going to do a Homeschool 101 where I'm going to answer tons of questions, help people with like, how do we get started, and to help address things like, oh, I have a spouse who's not on board, or my parents think I'm crazy, or, you know, like some of the issues you run into when you're pretty sure this is what you want to do, but you're getting a lot of
how you can come out as a homeschooler. Yes, you're still the same. You're the same advocate. You are, yes. So please follow Rachel, if you could, on Twitter at Rach4Patriarchy. That's, if you're listening, RACH, the number 4 Patriarchy. You do that great. And you can also see her link tree is there. You can purchase her book if you like also. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was honored to be here. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Of course, glad. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I am off for several days. However, I do have an interview that I did with Michael Shermer tomorrow night, if you want to watch that at 7 p.m. And a couple of things that will be popping out over the weekend, but I will be off for a bit. I will see you all